seems not that long ago, China's economic growth was the envy of the world. But now, the sentiment has completely reversed.
Deflation is the new headache for Chinese policymakers.
1 in 5 young people can't find a job. The property market is teetering on the edge.
Right now, the investment environment in China is really deteriorating for foreign firms.
China's America is fading very fast.
And the stock market, amid all this turmoil, has just hit a 5-year low. As alarming as the headlines are, the perceived reluctance of the Chinese government to announce any forceful rescue plan has come as a shock to many observers. Last week, over 2,000 delegates gathered in Beijing for the National People's Congress. It's the most important annual event for China's rubber stamp parliament, where the premier unveils the economic goals and policy priorities for the coming year. And this year, the goals announced by Mr. Li didn't contain much of a surprise. In 2024, China will aim to achieve around 5% GDP growth and 3% inflation, same as the goal of 2023. But analysts are skeptical of these numbers.
I think it's an unsurprisingly unrealistic sort of set of targets that's out there. There's, again, a reiteration that China can reach 5% growth without much of an indication on the policy measures that are going to support those drivers of growth. Last year, growth was far weaker than the official data was indicating. We think growth last year was around 1.5% to 2%, and we think growth in 2022 was slightly negative as well.
While the change of tone on China's economic outlook may surprise many, some of the challenges facing China right now have been a long time in coming. Since 1980s, the Chinese economy has mainly been driven by lavish investments in manufacturing, real estate, and infrastructure. The world has seen how the strategy worked, leading to remarkable economic growth and lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. But it has also generated a staggering amount of waste and debt for the local government, who are running out of projects to build to hit GDP targets and produce jobs. And then the COVID hit. During the pandemic, China adhered to a strict zero-COVID policy that saw entire cities shut down. Local governments were forced to spend massive amount of money for quarantines and testings.
So what is new is cracking down of the private sector together with the zero-COVID policy in the past several years, making the problems much more severe. And then all of a sudden, looks like the whole thing collapsed or in the process of collapsing.
The recovery after COVID restrictions were lifted was also much weaker than expected because China's policy measures didn't really focus on the consumer, which has left households struggling to match previous rates of spending. And that's really one of the key constraints on growth over the past year in particular.
This means that people are more likely to save their money than to spend them. In January, China consumer prices fell by 0.8% compared to the same month a year ago, the steepest decline in 14 years. Low consumer confidence is also having a cascading effect on the real estate sector, which was already subject to a government crackdown to rein in on unnecessary spending. Geopolitics and trade frictions with the US have also exacerbated challenges facing China's economy. Former President Donald Trump sparked a trade war with China by slapping hefty tariffs on Chinese goods.
Having a little squabble with China because we've been treated very unfairly.
His successor, Mr. Biden, limited China's access to advanced chip technology.
I've made sure that the most advanced American technologies can't be used in China.
The Chinese economy has, of course, experienced hurdles before and has been mostly successful in navigating them by pouring money into the market. But this time around, the authorities have yet to announce any major stimulus plan to rescue the embattled economy.
Many of the easier options that they could have chosen have already been chosen. There aren't that many ready available policy choices that they can use.
No matter what they do in terms of monetary policy and fiscal policy, the issues will not be solved. They are afraid of borrowing more, borrowing further for the sake of a stimulus package.
However, China still is the world's biggest manufacturing powerhouse and have been moving up the manufacturing value chain over the years. Despite the rising geopolitical tension with the West, China have established significant global dominance in emerging sectors such as electric vehicles and solar panels. Is there a different perspective to this? Perhaps what China is experiencing right now is just a rite of passage because the government is trying to shift away from the old investment-driven economic model towards the more sustainable one, centered around high value-added manufacturing such as EVs, batteries, and solar panels.
They call that as three new things. Indeed, they have done very well in these three new things. However, all of these three, put them together, counted for 8% of the GDP. The growth of this 8% of the GDP would not trade off with the real estate sector if we put downstream and upstream and itself together, count for 1/3 of the GDP.
China already runs a very substantial trade surplus with the rest of the world, which means that it produces much more than it consumes.
That overcapacity in manufacturing power, thanks to generous government subsidies over the years, is flaring up trade tensions with the West. The European Union has now launched an anti-subsidy investigation into Chinese EVs in an effort to protect the continent's auto industry.
Global markets are now flooded with cheaper Chinese electric cars.
If China was truly growing at rates close to where the official growth rates were being declared, then I don't think we would be seeing the same kinds of political backlash to China's exports. If the domestic economy is not growing at a fast enough rate to absorb this, it's going to be an increasing challenge for China to maintain the same pace of investment growth overall.
This is more of the institutional issue. Ideology is a part of the institution. So when you have a dominance of state ownership, then consequently, the resource allocation is end up with a small amount of resources to households, more resources to the government sector.